We've all been there, dating someone who's warm one moment and distant the next. You start wondering, is it me? Did I do something wrong? But the truth is, some people aren't bad partners. They just have an avoidant attachment style. The tricky part? They often don't even realize they're doing it. Today, we're going to uncover 5 key behaviors that show your partner is avoidant, so you can finally stop guessing and start seeing things clearly. When you start getting closer to someone, it's natural to expect that the connection will grow. You invest more time, you share more of yourself, and you think this shared intimacy will naturally be met with more openness from them. But with an avoidant partner, the opposite often happens. The moment emotional closeness begins to deepen, they feel something inside them shift. It's almost like an internal alarm goes off, not because you've done something wrong, but because to them, closeness feels like a threat. It triggers an old, deeply rooted belief that intimacy means losing themselves, being trapped, or being vulnerable in a way that could lead to pain. This belief may not be conscious for them, but their behavior starts to reflect it in ways that you can't help but notice. It can start small. You have an amazing night together, lots of laughter, deep conversation, maybe even moments where they open up more than usual. You go to bed thinking, this is it, we're finally connecting on a deeper level. But the next day, they seem different. Their responses to your messages are shorter, their tone is cooler, and suddenly they're too busy to make plans. It's confusing because there's no obvious conflict, nothing that went wrong. You replay the night in your head, wondering if you said something to push them away. What you don't realize in that moment is that their pulling away is less about you and more about how closeness makes them feel exposed. They may cancel plans after a weekend that felt especially intimate, citing work deadlines, family obligations, or the need for me time. On the surface, it might sound reasonable. Everyone needs space sometimes, but the timing is the giveaway. It happens right after moments of emotional connection, as though they need to reset back to a safe distance. That space they're creating isn't just physical, it's emotional. They might stop sharing as much, avoid affectionate gestures, or skip the little check-ins that used to be natural. It's their way of restoring a level of detachment that feels comfortable to them. Over time, this pattern creates a rhythm that's exhausting for you. You move closer, they step back, you open up, they close off. It's like trying to dance with someone who keeps changing the tempo. And because they can still be warm and attentive at times, you start to doubt yourself, thinking maybe you're overreacting or imagining things. But the truth is, people who are avoidant often have a deep need to maintain control over how close anyone can get to them. The more you close the gap, the more they feel the urge to create space. You might notice that even in the smallest interactions, they seem to regulate how much they let you in. If you text them something affectionate, they may respond with a lighter, less emotionally charged reply. If you bring up plans for the next weekend while you're still enjoying the current one, they might deflect, saying they'll let you know instead of committing. It's subtle, but consistent enough to leave you feeling like you're chasing them. What makes this dynamic so difficult is that they can still have moments of genuine affection. An avoidant person isn't incapable of love or closeness. They just have an instinct to manage it so it doesn't overwhelm them. And for someone who craves deeper connection, this hot and cold cycle can be emotionally draining. You might find yourself working harder to create those moments of closeness, only to watch them retreat afterward, leaving you feeling unbalanced and unsure where you stand. If you pay close attention, you'll see that this pulling away isn't random, it's patterned. It often comes right after peak moments in your relationship, as though there's an invisible line you're not supposed to cross. For them, those moments of intimacy can feel like crossing into dangerous territory, where they risk losing their autonomy or getting hurt. So they instinctively pull back, even if they still care about you. They may not articulate it, they may not even fully understand why they do it, but the behavior speaks louder than words. And because they don't see this as rejecting you, they see it as maintaining balance, they might be surprised if you point it out. To them, they're simply returning to their comfort zone, the distance that feels safe. But to you, It feels like a sudden shift, a cooling of the warmth you thought was growing. That's why it's so important to recognize this behavior for what it is, because otherwise you might keep taking it personally, thinking it's a reflection of your worth, when really it's a reflection of their comfort level with closeness. When you're building a relationship, there's an unspoken expectation that as time goes on, you'll get to know each other on a deeper level. You imagine more conversations about values, dreams, fears, and how you both see the future. But with an avoidant partner, those conversations often feel like you're trying to grasp smoke. Every time you think you're about to have one, it slips away. They might start off engaged when you bring something important up, but then quickly redirect to lighter, surface-level topics. It's not that they don't have feelings or opinions about the relationship, it's that discussing them in depth stirs up discomfort. Talking about the relationship means acknowledging emotional needs, expectations, and vulnerabilities, things an avoidant person often associates with pressure or loss of control. You might notice it in the way they respond when you ask questions that open the door to a deeper discussion. You could ask, "Where do you see us in the next year?" And instead of answering directly, they laugh it off, change the subject, or give a vague answer that leaves you more confused than before. If you try to revisit the topic later, they may say you're overthinking, or they might minimize the importance of having those kinds of conversations. This avoidance isn't about a lack of intelligence or an inability to communicate, it's about self-preservation. For someone with an avoidant style, relationship talks can feel like standing under a bright spotlight where every move is being examined and their instinct is to step out of that light as quickly as possible. Even when things in the relationship feel uncertain or tense, they might resist having a serious discussion about it. Instead of confronting the problem, they'll bury it under distractions, keeping conversations light, focusing on work or hobbies, or leaning into banter to steer away from the emotional depth you're seeking. And because they're often charming or engaging in these lighter moments, it can be easy to get swept along with them, forgetting that the core issues are still there, unaddressed. This can leave you feeling unheard because while the connection on the surface might feel fun, there's a missing layer of emotional intimacy that you crave. The avoidance can also be subtle. They may agree to have a talk, but keep their answers short, neutral, and carefully measured, giving you just enough to move the conversation along without really revealing their inner world. You might share something deeply personal, hoping to open the door for them to do the same, but instead they nod, "Thank you for sharing," and then pivot to a different subject. Over time, these interactions send an unspoken message. Emotional depth isn't a place they're willing to go often, if at all. Sometimes they'll avoid these conversations not by shutting them down directly, but by timing their unavailability. If you tend to bring up important topics at certain moments, maybe during dinner, on a walk, or after a long day, they might suddenly have something urgent to do or seem distracted and restless. It's a pattern that can make you feel like your needs for emotional connection are always inconvenient, as if there's never a right time to talk about what matters most. You might also notice how they respond when the relationship hits a turning point, moments where deeper discussions are almost unavoidable. Maybe a friend asks about your status as a couple, or a life decision forces the question of where you both stand. Instead of leaning in, they sidestep. They might make a joke, turn the question back on you, or use humor as a shield to keep the conversation from landing on anything too serious. What feels to you like an opportunity to bond and clarify the relationship feels to them like an opening they need to close. And it's not just the big, defining conversations they avoid. Even everyday check-ins about feelings, boundaries, or shared experiences can become tricky terrain. You might want to talk about how you felt during a certain interaction or share a moment of gratitude, but instead of meeting you in that space, they might brush past it quickly. It's not necessarily because they don't value you. It's that sustaining that level of emotional focus feels unnatural and potentially risky to them. Over time, this lack of deep conversation creates a gap between you. You may know their favorite foods, the shows they watch, and the places they've been, but you still feel like a stranger to their inner world. And that gap isn't from lack of time spent together, it's from the quiet resistance they have to opening that door and letting you in fully. They may show affection in their own ways, but when it comes to talking openly about the relationship, they keep a safe distance, protecting themselves from the vulnerability that real emotional intimacy requires. In a healthy relationship, independence and togetherness coexist. There's space for personal goals, individual interests, and time apart, but there's also a mutual desire to share experiences, create memories, and grow as a team. With an avoidant partner, that balance is often tilted heavily toward independence, not in the empowering I have my own life sense, but in a way that subtly keeps you at arm's length. They aren't just independent, they're protective of that independence to the point where shared experiences can feel like intrusions. It's not that they never want to spend time with you, but the moments you do share are often carefully managed, so they don't feel engulfed or overly dependent. You might notice it in their calendar. They'll schedule trips, hobbies, or social events without including you, not because they're trying to hide anything, but because including you automatically makes it feel more intertwined, more like a couple thing, and that closeness can stir discomfort. When you suggest joining them for an activity they already enjoy, they might politely decline or come up with reasons why it wouldn't work this time. At first, it might seem harmless. They like their alone time, you like yours. But over time, it becomes clear that they're keeping certain parts of their life walled off. Even in shared spaces, they may guard their independence fiercely. Maybe you're spending a quiet evening together and you suggest doing something spontaneous like cooking a meal or watching a movie. Instead of leaning into the moment, they might choose to stick to their own plans, reading a book or working on a project. To them, shifting their focus to a shared activity can feel like losing control of their personal time. This isn't about not enjoying your company. It's about maintaining a level of autonomy that feels safe to them, sometimes at the cost of connection. When you do plan something together, they may keep it short or infrequent. A weekend trip might turn into just one overnight. A day out together might end early because they have things to do, or regular date nights might be spaced further apart than you'd like. The pattern isn't about logistics. It's about limiting the amount of time spent in the shared emotional space that comes with those experiences. The more time you spend together, the higher the risk in their mind of becoming too enmeshed, too dependent, too close. It can also show up in how they approach milestones. Birthdays, holidays, or anniversaries might be handled in a way that keeps things low-key, steering away from anything that feels like a big emotional display. For them, a grand gesture or prolonged celebration can feel like stepping into a deeper emotional commitment, so they opt for simpler, shorter acknowledgements. While they may see this as practical or casual, for you it can feel like they're keeping the relationship at a safe, shallow depth. Their independence can sometimes take the form of needing space after shared moments. You might have a wonderful day together, but instead of wanting to keep the momentum going, they withdraw into solitude. This reset time is their way of regaining a sense of individuality, but it can leave you feeling like you've done something to push them away when, in reality, they're just retreating to familiar ground. Over time, you may begin to anticipate the withdrawal and even adjust your own expectations so you're not as affected by it. Another subtle way this behavior appears is in how they frame decisions. When choices come up that could be made as a couple, they lean toward making them independently, whether it's where to live, what events to attend, or how to spend free time. Their instinct is to make choices that prioritize their own needs and comfort first, with the relationship as an afterthought. This can create an imbalance where you feel like you're constantly adapting to their preferences, while they rarely step into a space that truly blends your lives. For someone on the receiving end, this pattern can be disorienting. You might start to wonder if you're asking for too much or if you should become more self-sufficient to match their pace. But the reality is, a healthy relationship thrives on shared experiences, not just parallel lives running side by side. With an avoidant partner, the priority often leans toward protecting their independence, even when it comes at the cost of connection. They might not see it as pushing you away, but the effect is the same. Less shared time, fewer shared memories, and a subtle but constant reminder that there's a part of their life you'll never fully be part of. When you're emotionally invested in someone, you naturally want to feel that your needs matter to them, that if you're hurt, stressed, or in need of comfort, they'll show up and be present with you. But with an avoidant partner, Moments where you need emotional support often reveal a quiet but unmistakable gap. It's not always that they don't care, it's that they're uncomfortable sitting in emotional spaces that feel too heavy or vulnerable. So instead of leaning in when you share your feelings, they downplay them, dismiss them, or redirect the focus away from your experience. This isn't always obvious at first. Sometimes it's subtle, woven into light-hearted comments or rational explanations that make you second-guess whether your feelings were worth sharing in the first place. You might open up about something that's been weighing on you, expecting empathy or understanding, and instead hear responses that minimize the depth of what you're going through. They might say, "It's not that bad," suggest you're overthinking, or point out how others have it worse. In their mind, they may believe they're helping you gain perspective or avoid dwelling on negativity. But what it often does is make you feel unseen. Emotional needs aren't about winning a contest of whose struggle is bigger. They're about being acknowledged and supported in that moment. When those needs are brushed aside, it chips away at your sense of safety in the relationship. It can also show up in the way they handle conflict. If you express that something they did hurt you, instead of genuinely listening and working to understand your perspective, they may become defensive or try to quickly shut the conversation down. They might insist you're being too sensitive or that you're making a big deal out of nothing. While their reaction may stem from discomfort with emotional confrontation, to you it can feel like they're invalidating your experience entirely. Over time, you may start to hesitate before bringing up concerns, worrying that your feelings will only be met with resistance or dismissal. Even in everyday life, you may notice that they tend to steer interactions toward logic rather than emotion. If you're excited about something and want to share your enthusiasm, they might respond in a way that feels flat, as if they don't share in your joy. If you're anxious about a situation, they may focus solely on practical solutions without first acknowledging the emotions you're feeling. While problem solving can be valuable, it's not a substitute for empathy. What's missing in these moments is that emotional mirroring that tells you they're truly present with you in whatever you're feeling. Another sign is how they react when you express a need for more connection. You might say you miss spending quality time together or that you'd like more affection, only to have them respond as though you're asking for too much. They may make you feel as though your needs are excessive or a sign of dependence rather than a natural part of a healthy relationship. For someone who's avoidant, closeness can feel overwhelming, so requests for deeper connection may be met with subtle resistance disguised as practicality or humor. When life throws you into a vulnerable moment, whether it's a personal setback, a family issue, or simply a hard day, you may find that they offer minimal comfort. They might check in briefly, but then retreat, as though they've fulfilled an obligation and can now return to their own space. For them, lingering in emotional territory can feel draining or risky, so they limit their involvement. To you, however, that limited response can feel like emotional absence, a reminder that in your most vulnerable moments, they're not fully there with you. Over time, these repeated experiences can lead to a quiet erosion of trust. You may still enjoy their company in lighter moments, but a part of you knows that when the emotional weight is heavier, you can't rely on them in the way you wish you could. You might start to internalize this by telling yourself not to be too much, or by holding back from expressing your needs altogether. While this might keep the peace on the surface, it also means sacrificing the emotional intimacy that makes a relationship feel safe and fulfilling. An avoidant partner often doesn't realize the impact of these patterns. They may see themselves as steady, practical, and low drama, not recognizing that their tendency to downplay or dismiss emotional needs leaves their partner feeling isolated. They may believe that avoiding intense emotional exchanges keeps the relationship stable, when in reality it creates an emotional gap that only widens over time. And because they rarely name this avoidance directly, you're left trying to read between the lines, wondering why moments that should bring you closer seem to create more distance instead. There's a natural rhythm in most relationships where vulnerability brings people closer. You share something personal, and the other person leans in, responds with empathy, and maybe even opens up in return. With an avoidant partner, that rhythm often feels disrupted. Vulnerability, whether it's yours or theirs, can trigger a retreat instead of an embrace. You might notice that after moments where you've opened your heart, revealed a fear, shared a childhood memory, or expressed how much they mean to you, their behavior changes. The warmth you felt in that moment begins to cool, and instead of continuing to connect, they seem more distant, quieter, or suddenly busy. It's as if emotional closeness sets off an internal alarm, and they instinctively create space to regain their sense of safety. Sometimes this withdrawal happens almost immediately. You could be in the middle of an intimate conversation, feeling like you're both truly present with each other, and then they make a sudden shift in tone, cracking a joke, changing the subject, or abruptly ending the conversation. Other times it shows up the next day. You might have spent the evening feeling like you were building a deeper bond, only to wake up and find their energy different. Shorter text replies, less eye contact, or a subtle drop in affection. It's confusing because nothing negative happened between you. In fact, you'd think the closeness would make them feel more secure. But for someone with an avoidant style, that closeness can feel like exposure, and exposure can feel dangerous. The same pattern often emerges when they're the ones being vulnerable. On rare occasions, they might let their guard down, tell you about a struggle they're facing, or share a part of themselves they usually keep hidden. In the moment, it feels like a breakthrough, like they trust you enough to step into that emotional space. But afterward, instead of building on that connection, they pull back. They might become quieter for a while, withdraw into solitary activities, or avoid contact altogether for a short period. It's not about punishing you, it's about recalibrating. Vulnerability for them can feel like losing control, so they instinctively retreat to rebuild the emotional walls that make them feel secure. This behavior can be especially hard to navigate because it's not always obvious. They might still respond to you, still make plans, still go through the motions of being present, but there's a noticeable difference in the depth of their engagement. It's like they've pulled part of themselves out of the interaction, keeping things light and safe until the memory of that vulnerability fades. For you, it can feel like you're constantly losing the ground you've worked so hard to gain. Over time, you might start anticipating the withdrawal. You may find yourself hesitating to share certain things, worrying that being too open will cause them to retreat again. You might even unconsciously match their pace, avoiding your own vulnerability to protect the connection from cooling off. While this may prevent the immediate pullback, it also keeps the relationship on a surface level, where true intimacy struggles to grow. This retreat after vulnerability can happen in all kinds of moments. It could follow a deep conversation late at night, a physical display of affection that felt especially tender, or a shared experience that brought you closer. It could even follow moments of celebration, when you express how grateful you are for them or how much you love what you have together. To someone who's avoidant, these expressions can feel like stepping closer to a line they're not ready to cross, a line where the emotional stakes feel too high. Their reaction isn't always cold or obvious. Sometimes it's more about subtle shifts, being less available for calls or texts, avoiding prolonged eye contact, or filling time with tasks and distractions. Other times, they might create a little friction by picking small disagreements, consciously or unconsciously, pushing you back to a more emotionally neutral space. This allows them to regain the sense of distance that feels comfortable. You might also notice that after these pullbacks, they eventually return to normal, as if nothing happened. They may re-engage, laugh with you, and make plans again, giving the impression that everything is fine. And because they can be warm and attentive in those moments, it's easy to forget that the withdrawal ever happened, until the next time you open up and the pattern repeats. The cycle of closeness, followed by distance, can be draining, especially when you're left questioning what you did wrong, when in reality, it's not about wrongdoing at all. It's about their relationship with vulnerability and the way they manage it to feel safe. When you're with someone you care about, it's natural to imagine a future together. It doesn't have to be about rushing into big commitments, but there's a comfort in hearing them talk about upcoming plans, shared goals, or even simple things you'll do together in the weeks and months ahead. With an avoidant partner, those conversations often feel slippery. They'll keep future plans vague, non-committal, or so loosely defined that you're left wondering where you actually stand. It's not necessarily because they don't see you in their life. It's because talking about the future can feel like locking themselves into something they're not ready to promise. To them, the future represents expectations, responsibility, and emotional closeness, all of which can trigger the same instinct to create distance. You might notice it in the smallest moments. You suggest a weekend getaway a couple of months from now, and instead of a straightforward yes, they respond with, let's see, or I'll have to check what's going on then. Weeks go by and the conversation never gets revisited unless you bring it up again. Or maybe you ask if they'd like to attend a friend's wedding with you next season, and they hesitate, saying it's too far ahead to make plans. In these moments, it's not the event itself that's the issue, it's what it symbolizes. Committing to something in the future means acknowledging that the relationship will still be in that place months from now, and for someone who's avoidant, that assumption can feel overwhelming. Even when they do make plans, they might leave themselves an escape route. They could agree in theory but add qualifiers like, if nothing else comes up, or as long as I'm not swamped. These small disclaimers keep the commitment loose, giving them room to back out if the closeness feels too much later on. To you, it might seem like a lack of enthusiasm or a reluctance to integrate you into their life, and over time, that uncertainty can wear on you. You start to feel like you can't fully relax into the relationship because you never know if plans will actually happen. This avoidance of future talk isn't limited to events or trips. It can extend to life decisions, relationship milestones, or even conversations about shared dreams. You might try to talk about where you see yourselves living one day, whether you'd like to adopt a pet together, or how you envision holidays being spent. Instead of engaging in that vision with you, they might deflect, joke, or answer in ways that keep things ambiguous. The less defined the future, the safer it feels to them, because ambiguity means less emotional risk. In day-to-day conversations, you may also find that they rarely bring up the future on their own. You're the one initiating talks about what's coming next, and they respond in ways that keep the timeline short. They might focus only on the immediate week or the next few days, steering away from anything that extends too far ahead. While it can feel practical on the surface, it's often a way to avoid the deeper emotional commitment that comes with looking ahead together. Even special occasions can reflect this pattern. Birthdays, anniversaries, or holidays might be planned at the last minute, avoiding the sense of build-up that comes with longer-term planning. While spontaneity can be fun, when it becomes the default, it can also signal a reluctance to emotionally invest in a shared future. For someone who's avoidant, leaving things unplanned keeps them in control, and control is their way of feeling safe. Sometimes this avoidance shows up as outright resistance to labels or defining the relationship's direction. You might bring up the idea of living together one day, or what your relationship might look like a year from now, and they might say they prefer to go with the flow or see where things lead. While these phrases can sound open-minded, they often serve as a shield against the vulnerability of committing to a clear path forward. Over time, the lack of concrete plans can create an undercurrent of uncertainty. You find yourself holding back from getting too excited about future possibilities because you've learned that things with them are never fully certain until they're happening in the present moment. It's a dynamic that can leave you carrying the emotional weight of planning and imagining your shared life while they stay anchored in the safety of the now. And while they may genuinely enjoy the time you spend together in the present, the absence of clear future intentions can slowly erode the sense of security and stability that a relationship needs to thrive.